All right. I don't want to have any promotion in my slides, so I put the promotion before my first slide.
I get great speakers.
Yes, great speakers. Chris will be there. I think I come to Amsterdam. Thanks. Okay, so thanks for coming. I talk about how convenience is killing open standards. But before we do it, means John did also a great job to wake you up already. A friend of mine tried to summarize the current IT strategy for you. And these 1.5 minutes I would like to share you before I go into my talk. I've seen it 100 times and it's still funny because it's true. Okay. So this is who I am. My name is Bernd. I'm working for a company named Netways and also Isinga, which we're having a booth over here. I'm also being a part of this pretty nice DevOps Days traveling circus with Chris and so many others here. And I'm living in Nuremberg, or pretty much I'm living in a small town in Nuremberg, which you don't know. Obviously, it's named Schwabach if somebody's interested in. And you can find me on Twitter using GetHash. So where's my background, perhaps, which is one of the reasons I come up with this talk, or this topic matters to me at some ground. I started as a Solaris admin at a company named Quelle. At this time was a big German retail company. They were broke already, not my fault. So I started there. I came out being like a Windows user for gaming stuff I did at home, and then we had like these big Solaris machines, E10K, that something rings a bell at your side. So I was very frustrated. That was a multi-million-dollar machine. The only thing I had a terminal, and I sometimes fell in love with it. Then I came to be into an Oracle DBA. Reason was they were looking for somebody, and I was not saying no, and so I started to be an Oracle person. Which I did this for about 8 to 9 years or so, and then I ended up in an open source company, which I work now for 12 years, and there's a pretty high chance that I retire there because I'm already getting too old to get hired by somebody else. Primarily, I love it so much. That's the reason. So that's why is my motivation for that talk, why I'm bringing this up. I think one thing is that I'm old in the technical perspective means John has like 2 decades more than I have, but if you have a decent age in that industry, you figure out that every 5 years somebody is telling you that everything you have done before is shit, and if you do it this way then it's perfect. So you're a little bit curious in some way. So the industry has a very short time memory. We have a very big talent for forgetting everything we learned a couple of years ago. Another thing, I was and I'm still curious, try to figure out what's right or wrong. So why do we something? Why do we behave as an industry as something? Why use and go for specific technologies or not? And at the end, I still want, or the time I was starting my career, we would like to do something great. The reality we had at the time, so in the company I worked, and this is not a real picture, you see the real picture later on, is that we pretty much had a very limited stack. So this was mainly driven a host company with IBM, and for the host folks, we were like, idiots. We were the guy with the Solaris and Unix stuff. They didn't take us serious. So we had a very limited pool of software and hardware you could use. So the strategy was like Sun or HBOX. We had some AX as well, and some whatever machine I cannot remember we had. But we were very limited. And so our goal at the time in the company was that we should move forward with like the website. So it was very important to have a web shop, which is at this time was crazy new stuff. So they gave us the job, okay, you have to run our retail shop online. You should make it happen from the engineering perspective. So what we wanted is like a great architecture, figuring how we can do it, high available, load balancing in some way, so how we can make this. The problem was the software pool was limited. So we had some vendors which offered some stuff and say we need this and we need a solution for the database, of course, which was given at that time was Oracle, application servers and all the things. And we got a lot of promises. So we'd say, oh yeah, no problem, we have a tool for this. So buy this super cheap and that will solve your problem. And for the other problem, you can buy another product. So we ended up like having 10 boxes in our office we need to install. And even if we wanted that, we ended up having this. So we bought a couple of projects and products and nothing really worked. And every time we try to get a new product in to fix the missing feature from the next product, we made it even worse, which is a good reason why we have a German word for that. To suppose improvements made it worse is Verschlimmbesserung. So one of the most important German words is like making things worse, trying to improve it. So it was very frustrating because the tools were so limited that the problems and the things we should achieve were really impossible to do so. And at the time, something changed in that way because the POSIX standard was already there at the time, of course, because so many systems had things in common like in VI or SED or all the tools which were part of the POSIX standards, or you can work in a file system, that this in some way changed it. So POSIX things at the time, it was kind of defined, I think, in 1990, already was about 10 years old at the time, and it was the foundation that we can get some change because POSIX was there as a foundation for all the GNU tools started up. So we were able, somebody knows Sun Freeware? Somebody knows this? The future retirement homes? Hello? So this was a way, for example, to get GNU stuff onto your Solaris box, which was not able to do in another way. So we get this, and it was super exciting. To get these tools into us, and we were able to get more features on our platform. Then Linux came up. So the thing is, and this is something I feel ashamed of today, that we treated our Linux people the same way that the host folks treated us. They were compiling kernels the whole day. Nothing worked. And they said, yeah, it's the future, that's the future, and we do stuff, and we were just laughing for weeks. At the end, the production web server run on the Linux machine under the desk during the Solaris machine did CT at home calculation to figure out if there's outer space noise. Very expensive, but we had to use the boxes for some things. So we ended up like running the production web server on the Linux box under the desk because this is the only thing who worked. And at some point we felt also in love with Linux, and the time it was really cool. So another thing which was new for us, that was communities at the time, because in the other product space you pretty much had your vendor. They were coming in and took care of you from a vendor perspective, but there was no real communities. And also with the communities, we had a very increased diversity. So there were so many things we could have access to, especially in the Linux world. There were so much things to see, and it was just fantastic. So that time, I would say it was about like 3 to 4 years. So much changed when I look back now. That was really cool. Coming from the limited, like Solaris, AHX, VX pool to that open Linux tool world. So, yeah, well, time flies. It's about 20 years ago now. So where's the current status? Perhaps it's not as bad as it looks on this picture. But there are some things I'm a little bit worried about. So, of course, first of all, a lot of change because it means we have these events. We have so many events. I think we have like, I don't know, 80 DevOps days every year. So there's pretty much a conference everywhere. Just drive to a big major city and there will be a conference. You pretty much can like, yeah, cancel your apartment and just do conferences all the time. So there's so much community going out. A lot of has changed here. Microsoft Lab Linux means it's not a new thing. I know you got it, but 20 years ago, remember, that was a big laugh if you had that picture already at the time. And it's good they do it now. We have more open source than ever. Of course, we have tons of open source on GitHub, GitLab, and all that other tools out there and other platforms. But the thing we have is that the market changing rapidly. So what we see is that we have a very increased part of the market going to the public cloud. Even the hybrid is a little bit growing, but we see, of course, a transformation, which is not new for you, of course, going from on-premise business to cloud vendors. So I think there's multiple perspectives on that, and some of you may say, okay, this is like a backward thinking dude who has no idea about the future. Could be true, but I think there are some problems with the current development we're having right now. So where's the problem in my perspective? One thing is that open source is not open standards. That is one thing people often mix together, that if something which is open source and you can do it does not mean that interoperability is guaranteed, because it's not the same, because an open standard needs to be defined from a consortium, for example, like W3C or something else. So it's a really big difference between having a lot of open source with this out there and having an open standard where you can connect different systems together. Another thing is like having an API is not an open standard. So it's not the same, often mismatched because people think, yeah, you have an API, it's open, which is true, but that does not mean that it's a standard. So something we have right now, and this compared to the first one you see is the real picture of Seattle-Tacoma Airport, is that we have a very unbalanced market here. So if you're not working for those of two shops, you have to go on the other line and wait longer for your luggage or to give it up. So yeah, fair enough, they are using the airlines a lot, so I understand it. But what's the problem with this? So the market looks like this. It's like the numbers are a little, kind of like 6-7 months old. I think it's still changed a little bit, but in general I think they are true. We see that currently Azure has the biggest growth rate. I think for various reasons. I think one is that their sales infrastructure is way better than Amazon's sales infrastructure, and they pretty much have every company into their account already. But most interesting for me, which I don't care honestly if like AWS or Azure or Google, I'm super happy if they're successful, that we see that there are pretty much 3 or 4 players will run that market. So it will be AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, and perhaps IBM. But at the end, you see there are some others. I don't know if somebody here is running on the Alibaba Cloud. Someone? Anyone? See how popular it is in Belgium. So it's very limited geographically, but the other cloud providers pretty much rule the whole market. So this is what's happening. They're, of course, a very big long-tail industry doing hosting and all that stuff. But this is pretty much where we're heading to, that in 5 to 7, 8 years from now, 90% of the IT will run here. That is what happened, as I see it now. The problem is that we don't have any standards here. So they have, of course, all the API, and they have a platform, a web interface, whatever we can access their services, but there's no real open standard. Which is one of the reasons why tools like Terraform are so popular. Terraform is #1 growing config management tool we have currently. And I think this is one of the reasons, because Terraform in some way is bridging that gap, having access to a hybrid cloud or multi-cloud provider system with creating kind of a standard layer which gives you access to different cloud providers. Even you can discuss that so many people I know say multi-cloud strategy is not smart because it takes all the benefits out from a cloud strategy because it makes you slow again, that it doesn't make sense. But I think one of the reasons bridging that standard gaps is the reason why Terraform is so successful. So there's a lot of impact on open source and open standard in that way, what cloud providers do. And of course there are good and evil, or perhaps not so good. There are differences, so you see like different business models this company have. For example, if you buy various cloud services at Google and you buy an Elastic Stack there and all that stuff, they handle the support for you, but they make sure that they give money back to Elastic, to the creators of the software, which Amazon does not do this. So Amazon takes open source software and have a bunch of it, sell it as a product. They cut down the revenue stream to the creators of the open source software, make the money on their own. They're big enough to hire all that people to take care of that software. And they pretty much cut away the customer access to the creator of the software, which we see now kind of creates fear and protection. Because what happened is that open source companies come up with the new licenses, like Redis or MongoDB. They try to protect their intellectual property, or they try just to survive, because in some way every open source company has to make some money, and also all the open source software outside is mainly done by people who are paid from some other company. They're not doing it at home. So of course open source is done at home at some place, but the majority of enterprise and professional open source software is paid by companies for. But that's a thing, and all these companies don't know how to behave in that way because they would like to try to protect their value. So We have something like a server-side public license and all that stuff, which is not part of the official OSI license standard. Honestly, I don't have a real opinion on that. In some way, I'm not happy about that some companies come up with new licenses, but I also get that companies who invest a lot in creating their software try to make sure that they have some access to their customer and they have the ability to make some revenue. And if somebody has joined Frank Karliczek from Nextcloud talk at FOSDEM, he talked about the same way, and at the end of his talk, somebody said, okay, I get this point because which is totally right, pro GPL and all that stuff. And somebody in the audience had that question and say, hey, what is, if Amazon takes your Nextcloud stuff and create the offering, what would you like to do? And he said, yeah, well, that's difficult. And that's exactly the thing, because he can bring some trademark stuff in order, because he can try to protect his trademark and say, you cannot use my logo. On the other hand, it's super easy for them to taking this, creating a business model on top of it, and cut down the revenue stream he has currently. So open source and standards need some support, and at the end, support is money. And if that world changing, that people just use a service somewhere, that will have an impact. Perhaps right now, perhaps, I don't know, cloud providers will change the behavior in some way. Means also Google, I think, does way better compared to other ones right now. But it's an important thing to think about it, how the industry currently works and what the changes will be for the industry. So where's the future? I don't know. I think we're just like starting with all this. So we had like infrastructure, platform as a service, software, and now function as a service, which is like a layer of vendor login, in my opinion, which is crazy. Anyway, you can have a different opinion on that. So the question is winter coming? Is it all bad? I would say no, because it's like a trade-off. It's a trade-off you should think about, and that is pretty much the idea of my talk, that perhaps some of you think about, oh well, this dude is not totally wrong. So of course it's a risk. Convenience is a risk. And Walter mentioned that I have a MacBook as well, I'm sorry, which is having an Apple thing, or have an iPhone as well, which is also, of course, some convenience and not super open sourcey. Well, it's a decision made. On the other hand, yeah, sorry. Of course, login is a risk too. And I think it's a very big difference if you decide from a personal perspective, okay, I bought some, I don't know, 200 apps at the Apple Store, and then if I switch over to Android, then this investment is gone, or do this as a company. So convenience is a risk, absolutely, but also login is a risk, in my opinion. Another thing is, of course, slowness is a risk too. And I totally get it. If you are a startup and if you have a great idea and say, I have this perfect app or platform in mind which I would like to come up with, you will probably today not start with hiring 3 ops folks and buy some data center space and do that all on your own. Of course you will go to the cloud and spin up some machines because it's fast, and speed is very important, especially you come up with a new idea. But for all that enterprises out there, is really the only way they can do IT is like selling their data centers and going full public cloud? I don't know. Means some of them tried, some of them failed hard, some of them I know try still and fail hard every day. So I think it's a big difference. I'm not saying that the cloud in general is bad. I think the cloud definitely is the future, and people will not build their own data centers anymore, or less people will do it so. But I think we need more diversity in that cloud market. We need more players in it. We need also make sure that others have a chance to enter that market in 5 or 6 years from now, which I see is in danger in some way. Another thing is that priority cloud cost optimization is the #1 priority by everybody people ask. So people go to the cloud and then they go to another company or hire someone who's like taking care of their cloud cost optimization, where I'm always wondering, why have you never done this before? Right? Before they just ordered servers, created a VM, had VMware licenses in place or whatever. And now when they moved onto the cloud, there are about 20 or 30 companies out there on the internet who just do nothing more than cloud cost optimization, which is in some way nuts. But yeah, this is how it works. Another thing is the pricing stuff. People always say public cloud service is always getting cheaper and cheaper, which is honestly is not true. So there are a couple of things like RDS which gets more expensive in the last years, but in general I agree it's still true. But the problem is that pricing changes in a market where only a couple of players are part of that market. So pricing in an oligopoly is a totally different thing. And I'll give you an example. So insulin was kind of discovered in 1920, and the person who discovered it sold it for $1. So he said this is a super thing, but it's super important for everyone, and he would like to make sure that everybody has access to. There was technically no innovation, so insulin pretty much did not change at all in the last 15 years. It's pretty much the same. In 2006, a dose of insulin cost $67 on the US market. In 2019, I'm sorry, oh no, I'm true. It costs $285 on the market. For two reasons. One thing, the pricing there is not regulated, and there are only 2 to 3 companies producing insulin on the American market. They own the market. They can do whatever they want. They can come up with every pricing they want to. There's no regulation to force them to go down on a decent price of, I don't know, $20, $25. Even the production costs pretty much nothing. And people die. And you can look it up. It's a reality. People die because they're not able to afford the dose of insulin because it's crazy expensive. It means this is capitalism, I know. This is how it works. But the concept of pricing in a market where only 2 to 3 players control the market is always the same. It has nothing to do with like insulin, perhaps cloud computing, perhaps chocolate or water. It's the same. Nestle owns pretty much, and Walter brought this up 2 days ago, thank you for that. They pretty much own all the water resources on Earth. They pump out 50,000 liters every hour in Africa, and people have to buy a bottle and Kapstadt for €1 because it's so expensive, and the basic water they can get out is so dirty they have to buy it. Means they control the market. They own the water, pump it out, and sell it to people on a price which they barely, sometimes not able to afford it, which ends up that people get sicknesses and some diseases come up again, which were like erased 20 years ago because water quality is so bad. It's the same thing, right? So abuse of power comes by no surprise. If somebody is so powerful who can control it, and coming back to the cloud world I see in 5 to 10 years, this cloud highway, this internet highway, is controlled 90% by 3 companies. And I don't want that. This is the reason why I'm giving this talk. I don't want this. I doubt that I can prevent it, but I don't want it. Another thing is that the big 3 players or 4 players are controlled by a single government. And I'm totally not against that American company because it's nothing to do. I would also not be happy if all the 3 or 4 cloud players would be under control of a Belgium or a German government. I think it's not good. It's just not good, and means, you know, political wise the world is not more stable than 5 to 10 years ago. It's nuts. It's just crazy. It means there's some dude who has a lot of power and some crazy ideas and burgers. He can put a lot of pressure on stage, which he's doing. So you immediately know what this is. This is a sheep from Venezuela. So last year in August, there was like an executive order, I wrote it down, number 13884, to permit American companies serve any company in Venezuela. So what happens, people in Venezuela, like marketing agencies using Adobe Cloud, their cloud services, were not able to use their services from one day to another. They were just like dropped out, locked off, that's it. Means, thanks God, I don't live there and I don't need the services, but I would do everything I can to not have that relation to somebody else, and nobody else can put that impact on me. And that is something I see could happen in the future because, again, the world is not as stable as it was 5 to 10 years ago. And I had this discussion with Sarad Khan, which is also one of the fellow DevOps Days co-organizers, and he's like an AWS hero and he's totally in favor. And every time we meet, we talk about this. And we both agree that we have different opinions, which is, of course, still a good foundation for a nice evening. And he talked about his stuff and all the things. And at the time, the Syria crisis was going on, and they was not sure if Turkey goes into and all that stuff. And perhaps if you follow politics, you see that there were a lot of things going on between Iran and Trump. And I think we met a week before something in Oslo at DevOps Days, and I think, are you 100% sure that, like, if you do countries are in problem, that there's no executive order coming up for except preventing American companies selling your stuff to Turkey? And he said, yeah, well, 100% sure I'm not. And that was enough for me. I was a super happy evening for me. So what can you do? There are different things. Perhaps don't follow every hype. That way, in general, makes always sense, not follow every hype. Do we have an idea where this quote is from? From which guy? Damn it. Yeah, Kelsey Hightower. My colleague Blaram sent me that yesterday evening, and I was like, is it an April Fool's joke? Is it that Kelsey Hightower know for years? And he's like predicting, like, I don't know, all this microservice and everything, is it? So he has an excellent article, which is, take a picture if you want to, it's definitely worth reading it. And it's just part of a bigger podcast where he's explaining that, and I was wondering, reading that article, he's saying, so companies who did not have the discipline to work on a monolithic piece of software in the last years now decide doing multiple small pieces of software because they weren't able to do a big one, and then invent things like open tracing and Prometheus to figure out why it's not working. And I was like, this is everything against I heard from you in the past. He still has also a very good example of why microservices of course make sense in some way, but it's a very good read, and I didn't expect this kind of like saying from Kelsey. So if you have the time, look into it. Another thing you can do, of course, even if you are hybrid, on-premise, public, like implement your cost control now. It's often that you hear people, they never had cost control when they were on-premise, and just when they started somewhere else and figured out it's not cheaper than everybody told them, they come up with a cost control. Of course, big enterprises have a cost control, but usually if you come down to resource management, often it's not very good. So why not? Be reasonable. So whenever you can, try to figure out what are you doing, what is the consequences of it. Means perhaps it's a life advice, but I'm just more talking about the technical stuff here. Make sure that your products and the platforms you're working with are able to work with each other. Make sure that you follow perhaps an open standard if possible. And the thing is, and there's a big problem with open standards are slow. And that's one of the reasons why nobody gives a on open standards anymore. Everyone heard of OCCI? So you see it's like an open cloud computing interface standard which nobody cares about. So there are standards in our industry, but nobody cares anymore because it slows everybody down, and especially in a world where the differentiator and the USP for some vendor is more important than the interop stuff, then it's a big thing. Prevent vendor login. Okay, perhaps this is like, if you already decided to have like a full cloud provider A, B, C, whatever strategy, then this is too late. Perhaps it's not a problem. Perhaps. You will see. Support variety. So if you are part of that industry, and if open source and standards and community, and also that everybody has a chance to enter that market, which is another thing, because again, imagine if these 3 to 4 players own the internet, how big is the chance that somebody else can come in and say, I would like to be part of that market as well. I would like to be a service provider. I would look to have a decent part of that highway the data is on. If you control 90% of the highway, would you be the one driving the fast lane or the carpool lane, or would it be somebody else? I think I would the carpool lane, even if I'm the only driver, because you own the highway. And that is something which is other thing that happens. Demand contribution. So some cloud providers do so. So perhaps if you're a small shop, they will not care. If you're a bigger customer, perhaps they listen to you. So demand that they give back. If they use a tool, if they use open source from any vendor out there, demand that they give back, like Google does in some examples. Because that's important, that others in that game still have a chance to be part of it. Oops. Doubt? Again, it's always a good advice, I think. And last but not least, diversity is up to you, and it's up to us. So if we want a diversity in that market where everybody can be a part of, I think we have to demand more, we have to take care of it, and think about it. And that's the reason for my talk. So thank you for listening, and enjoy the day. Thanks.